Hi everyone, welcome back. Today's video is going to be me ranking my Urban Decay palettes. I only have 8 palettes left from Urban Decay at this point. I've had more over the years, but I've eventually decluttered them just because I wasn't using them as much. So these are the 8 that are remaining in my collection at this point in time. I have done this sort of ranking before for my Too Faced palettes, and they were definitely the palettes that I have the most of from any brand. I think there was more than 20. Maybe there was more than 30 palettes in there. So I can link to that one down below if you're curious to see my favorites from, or my entire collection of Too Faced ranked. But this one is going to be my Urban Decay palettes, and I'm going to start from the very bottom, which would be my least favorite. So kicking it off with my least favorite, I have the Naked 3 palette. And I would actually declutter this one if it weren't for the fact that it actually has very specialized packaging that was tailored towards me at an Urban Decay event when they launched at like Square One in Mississauga. That was a really fun event. They invited like PR to it, and we all had these like palettes that were just like drawn on, and then our names are written on it too. So you can see Shell written right there. I actually initially stayed up late to buy this palette when it first launched. I remember staying up till like, I don't know, was it midnight or 1 a.m. to like get the launch of this palette on Sephora's website. And I was so amped about all of the Naked palettes back then that I wanted to own this one, even though it's not really my style. I am not a pink kind of person. I don't wear a lot of pale pinks. If I'm wearing pink, I want it to either be like a loud, bright color or like a neon. So I picked this one up mostly out of loyalty. Sorry, let me say that again. I initially picked up the original palette that I had of this that I have since decluttered, but I've kept this one because it's got the special packaging on it. So I did use it initially quite a bit. This palette you can see is completely untouched. I have not used a single shadow in here since I got it, which kind of tells you just how little I actually like this palette. When I did first get it, I did like quite a few of the shades. I really liked Trick, which is kind of more of a rose gold color. And I remember, I think, liking Factory over here. But I gotta say, very much like the Naked Heat palette that I no longer own, this is very much like a one-trick pony for me. I'm not a huge fan of how the colors just sort of like, they're too monotone, basically. And I like a lot of monotone or monochromatic colors, but this one is just too same all across the board. So I just never really fell in love with this. And like I said, I did declutter my original Naked 3 when I got this one because there was no point in me keeping 2 of them. And I will keep this just because the packaging is so pretty on this and it's a special moment in time for me. But like, I don't like it. There's nothing inherently wrong with the shadows. It's just not my cup of tea. Okay, my second least favorite in my collection is the Afterdark palette. For a few reasons. I picked this up because I was excited to see more color from Urban Decay at the time, and when they were sort of launching this palette, the Naked palettes were so prevalent. Like, they were constantly coming out. They were all boring and relatively neutral, and I just wanted more color from Urban Decay because that's kind of what they used to be known for. So I picked this up, but it's kind of a problematic palette in the sense that it's all shimmer. Like, there's no mattes in here whatsoever, and it can be kind of hard to create a look without any mattes. So I often don't think to reach for this palette just because it's very hard to make a cohesive eye look. There are some phenomenal colors in here. I mentioned recently that Fringe by Urban Decay is one of my absolute favorite eyeshadow colors, and it's great that it's in here, but I've been using the one up in my electric palette. So at least I have a backup of it, but like the rest of the shades don't feel to me to be that unique. And I actually am really annoyed with the shade Lounge in here because like you'll see in another palette I'm gonna mention later, the shade Lounge is stunning, but it's not, and while it's in this palette and it's in the other palette, it's not the same shadow. And I'm so annoyed by that because the shadow in the other palette is so much nicer than the Lounge in this palette. So I'm just like, what happened here? Like, they're not even the same color, which is just really bizarre. They're close, but they're not the same. I also thought it was really bizarre that they put in this shimmery brown up here because it's such a colorful palette. I just didn't see the point in putting a brown in there. And honestly, that shadow looks untouched. I probably swatched it and that was about it. This is a very underloved palette just because I find the colors just annoying to work with, probably just because there's no mattes in here. There's some great shades in here, but like I never think to reach for it. So I keep it because there are still beautiful colors in here, but this is largely untouched in my collection. Okay, the next one, which honestly could be relatively interchangeable with the Afterdark palette, is the Alice Through the Looking Glass palette. It slides out, so I'll just pull that out to talk about. I got this from my friend Haley guess about a year and a half ago. She was decluttering her palettes and she just didn't use this one that much anymore or at all. And she was like, well, why don't you take it? And I was like, oh, okay, I'm actually interested in a few shades in there. And there are some colors in here that really draw me towards it. Heads Will Roll Up Here, Hatter, Metamorphosis, and Cake, which is not usually typical for me because I don't usually go for that kind of pink color. But those really drew me into the palette, and they're the ones that my eyes gravitate towards immediately. However, the colors, oh, Bandersnatch too, actually, that's a really beautiful color. But that being said, that's like 4 or 5 colors out of a palette that has 20. And it's funny to me that my eye is so drawn towards those colors that I almost forget about all the other boring colors in here. I am really not drawn towards this last row over here. There's some browns in here that I just never really touch. And even though I'm really drawn towards those colorful shades that I've already mentioned, that's the only colors that I think to use in this palette. So while those are fun, the bulk of this palette is largely left untouched because I'm just not inspired by it. And it's so funny, and I think this is true for a lot of people who buy makeup. You look at a palette, you see the colors that you're immediately drawn towards, and then you figure you need to pick up that palette because those colors are so beautiful. But it kind of gives you this sort of like blind eye towards the rest of the palette, and you don't notice that the rest of it is rather boring and or unimaginative, which is kind of what I feel like with the other shades in this palette. I mean, Sellers and Grum is pretty, but there's so many sort of like brown taupes that I just don't care about in this palette. So yeah, this one's okay, but it's not a favorite. I'm holding on to it because there are some nice looks that I can do with it, but I think this is one that, like Haley did, I will probably eventually end up decluttering. Okay, now we're getting closer towards the top, and if this was a few years ago, this palette probably would have been like my #1 Urban Decay palette, but it's a few years later now, so I'm not as taken with it. But it's the Vice 3. Do you guys remember this palette? Oh, what a winner this thing was. So my mom picked this up for me for Christmas. What year was it? Was it like 2014? I don't remember when this thing came out. So this palette has a plethora of shades that work so well together. And this is one of those ones where I'm drawn to quite a few of them in here. Even like I mentioned with the Alice Through the Looking Glass palette, where I didn't love the gray tones in that palette. For whatever reason, the gray row in here really calls to me, and I've done some really pretty like gray toned eyeshadow looks with it. I will say that my favorite colors in here do tend to be in this row here. Dragon, Freeze, and Heroine are gorgeous. They are so pretty. I really love doing like a bright shimmery green eyelid with a matte navy in the outer corner. Stunning. And this one in here really did do such a good job with that. The copper with the purples and pinks really worked out really well, and I love this matte row over here that's perfect for like transition colors or brow bone highlight shades. And I have used this thing to death, although it doesn't really look like it. Like, I don't understand how some people can pan eyeshadows so consistently, and yet I have palettes that I've used what I feel like to death, and it looks like almost untouched. Like, I don't know what's going on there. I will say that over time, I think the quality of this has degraded a little bit. Some of the shadows have gone a little bit more dustier over time, and they're not nearly as pigmented as they were. So for that reason, it sort of falls in the middle of my favorites from Urban Decay at the moment. But what a knockout this palette was, and it was by far my favorite Vice palette that they ever released. I ended up getting the Vice 4, I think, the year afterwards, and that was just like such a letdown. I ended up passing that on to a friend because I saw no point in keeping that. But this one, freaking stunning. Such a good palette. And I like too the layout of it because the when I brought this on vacation with me one time, like the mirror is so big that it can just like sit upright too. Like it's quite handy. Anyway, they stopped making Vice palettes, didn't they? Like, they don't come out anymore. Huh. Wonder why they stopped doing that, because I feel like they were really popular. Okay, the next one is probably going to be a little bit of a surprise to people because nobody talks about this palette at all. This is the Nocturnal Shadowbox. And this is a sleeper hit. Like, I often forget that I own this, but whenever I use it, I'm like, oh yeah, you're really good. So this palette is kind of like the old style eyeshadow palettes they used to have way back in the day. I think they were always called like shadow boxes back then, weren't they? What makes this palette so good is particularly this row down here. The top row is like your basic set of neutrals, which is very handy for putting a look together. But what kills me about this palette is the shade Lounge in this one. This is the right color of Lounge. The one in the After Dark palette is totally wrong. It doesn't look the same. It's so annoying and so frustrating, because when I realized that I had a backup of Lounge, because I do quite like that shade, I was like, oh yes, good. I don't have to be worried about running out of it. Again, not that I'm running out of eyeshadow anytime soon. But when I swatched them side by side, between this palette and the After Dark one, I was like, no, you're not a dupe. You're not even the same color. You have the same name, but you are not the same color. It was very frustrating. Anyway, the colors in here, Fireball, holy smokes. It's such a fun, like pink to gold kind of color. Backfire is lovely. Putting those three together in a look is stunning. And I've just realized now that this also has Heroine, which is probably the same color from the Vice 3 palette, which is a stunning matte navy blue. And then of course there's a black in here to help round it out. But like this, it's such an innocuous looking palette, right? Like it's small and compact, which I quite like, and it's cardboard. No one talks about this thing. I really don't know when it was launched, but this is wonderful. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this one. I was sent it in PR, I think when Shoppers Drug Mart was first launching their beauty boutique and Urban Decay stuff, and I love it, and I don't want to get rid of it. It's not used enough in my collection, but it is one of my top favorites from Urban Decay for sure. Okay, next up we have the OG Naked palette, and oh, this is just like what started it all for most of us, I assume. It's definitely the first eyeshadow palette that I truly owned. And my friend Dorothy actually brought this from the States to Canada, because I think Canada had just like completely either sold out or like we had no stock yet. Anyway, she brought this up from the US and I was so excited. And I used this thing to death. It was just one of my favorite palettes to use constantly. I've used the crap out of Virgin here. That is a wonderful lid color, and I have used it on the brow bone too. It's just stunning, and I'm going to be really sad when I do finish that color off. I've loved Naked and Buck as well. They were perfect transition colors. A little bit more cooler tone than what I go for now, but back then I was definitely using a lot more cooler toned eyeshadow sort of through the crease. And then Smog as well. Oof, that is, like, I don't normally talk about like shimmery browns as being something that I'm really into, but Smog is a really good color. My interview look when I'm going for like a job interview has always been Virgin, Buck, and Smog, and it just makes me feel really put together. I wear it every single time that I go for an interview. I mean, it's been a while since I've done that, but like, it's just a really good look, and I feel really confident in those shadows. Another look that I loved so much was using Toasted on the lid with Hustle in the outer corner, and then I think I was always pairing it with Tarte's Exposed on the cheeks. Loved it. Just such a good color combination. And it's funny to me too, because this thing is so shimmery, right? Like the only shadows in here that are matte are Naked and Buck, but I was wearing these constantly all over the eyes, and it never really looked weird, like having a shimmer in the outer corner. I fell in love with this palette, and I still own it, and I still think it's wonderful. I am still surprised to this day that they discontinued it, because I thought it would have been like just a good relic to keep forever, but it must have stopped selling, which is why they eventually got rid of it. All right, last two palettes. So the one that they replaced the original Urban Decay Naked with was Naked Reloaded, and I have to say I do like this more than the original Naked now. And that's possibly because over time I've used the original Naked so much that I am looking for something a little bit new, a little bit more updated to be using. And I think that the Reloaded palette was a wonderful replacement for the original Naked palette. What makes this one so nice to me, I mean, first of all, I hate the packaging. Let me say that right off the bat. It's weird. It's like this flower motif on it, and it's this weird like puffy cushion material. Very strange. But what's nice about this is that they finally eliminated the brush section at the bottom. Like, I am done with the Urban Decay double-sided brushes. They just don't need to exist. Like, cut it out of the palette, reduce the price, that's fine. What makes this palette such a lovely replacement for the original Naked palette is that they've incorporated a lot more mattes than they did with almost, I think, any of the other Naked palettes. You've got a huge section over here of mattes. You've got a very dark brown as well that is matte, which is, I feel, kind of necessary in these palettes. Retro, oh, what a fun matte coral color. I love putting that through the crease. It's phenomenal. And it really adds a lot of, what do I even want to say, like specialness to the rest of this palette, because while we've been so focused on Naked palettes being predominantly like always neutral. It's so nice to have a color like this in there that can really amp up looks and make them a little bit more colorful. The other part that I really like about this palette is they took what could essentially be a chunk of shadows from the Naked Heat palette and whacked them in here. Reputation, Burn, Endgame, and probably Boundaries over here could have easily fit into the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette. And while that palette I think was a success, I didn't love it because it was very one note, but I like the fact that they have replicated those kinds of shades in here, and there's like 4 of them, which is plenty as far as I'm concerned. You've got a gold over here with Barely Baked. Angel Fire is stunning, although best used wet. That is such a gorgeous color. This thing just really spoke to me. I was so glad that I was sent it in PR when it first launched. And I was really skeptical about it at first because I was like, no, the original Naked palette, like you can never replace that. And then I played with this one and I was like, yeah, okay, you did a good job, Urban Decay. Like this is a stunning palette. Okay, so my top palette, I'm pretty sure this is gonna come as no surprise to anybody because I do talk about it quite a bit. It's the Electric palette. This to me was the pinnacle of Urban Decay as far as I'm concerned. Urban Decay has very much changed the direction of their products over the years. I think basically because of the success of the Naked palette, they realized that they could probably make a lot more money by catering to the neutral crowd, which is unfortunate because when I first discovered Urban Decay, they were a very grungy, edgy brand, and they've lost their way in that sense, I feel like. And for me, this was kind of like, that was it for them. Like they've never really managed to attain this kind of excitement for me in a palette since this launched. So the Electric palette, everybody's seen it at this point. It has long been discontinued. You really can't get your hands on it anymore unless you're looking on like eBay or maybe like, what's that place called that resells makeup that's already been used? Can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'm sure I'll annotate it. Glambot, that's what it is. I'm pretty sure you can probably find it on Glambot. The colors in here are just exactly what I need to use when I feel uninspired. If I'm looking at all my makeup palettes and I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do, I grab this palette and I put something together that just makes me feel alive. 2 of my favorite shadows are in here, which I mentioned in a video, I think it was last week. Fringe and Urban. They're lovely. They're so freaking good. But there's other shadows in here too that just really inspire me. Like it's a weird color combination sometimes when you're looking at it and you're like, how do I put those together? But if you grab like 2 shadows that you feel like are interesting and start to work with them together, somehow a look just always comes out that looks so much fun. Like I can't say enough good things about this. I'm always inspired when I use this palette. I always feel confident. I feel energized whenever I'm using this thing, and I'm just so happy that I own it and love it so much. This palette is quite old at this point, but the quality has not degraded on me whatsoever. I have no issues with it. And they haven't also gotten kind of dusty like with what happened with the Vice 3 palette. That palette's definitely started to lose a lot of its pigmentation, but that hasn't happened with this one whatsoever. And I just love it. I love it so freaking much. This one is the absolute best by Urban Decay. And I wish they would launch more things like this, but they just don't do that anymore. I feel like everything that's coming out is like bland, very bland. But back to this one. This one is a true favorite in my collection. Okay, so that's gonna be it for this video. Those were my 8 Urban Decay palettes ranked from least favorite in my collection up to my favorite. I will stipulate though that obviously because I've decluttered other palettes, those would be my least favorite, but I mean, I can't go through all the palettes that I've gotten rid of over the years. So these are the ones that have stuck around, so obviously I like them enough to still keep them. All right, thanks for joining me today. I hope you found this interesting. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.